Hello there.
Hello, hello.
It's a real pleasure to meet you. Thank you for joining this. I want to make sure I have your permission, your blessing to record, which you're obviously aware of because you should have got the notification, and to retransmit this in whole and in part on social media so people can get value from it. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
She had a lot of good things to say. So I'm very
Yeah.
excited to see how we can learn from each other. Jonathan, could you please introduce yourself and tell us what you do? I always like to say, because I'm a bit of a provocateur, and that is, why should we listen to you?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. Well, my name is Jonathan Sheeley. I'm an executive business coach. I usually work with leadership teams of 3 to 6, doing a revenue of 1 to 15 million US dollars. And I won't work with people who don't have a growth mindset. So those are kind of like my three factors when I'm choosing people to work with. And I really do like to choose who I work with because um, people like to be coached. At the end of the day, they like someone working with them. But not everyone is a great fit to work with me just because of my background and because of the way that I like to communicate with folks. And I'm not a pushover. So what I enjoy doing is helping people overhaul their mindset. When you work with me, we're going to take a great step of assessment where you are today. And if you've never thought about where you want to be 20 years down the road, we're going to do that first. And then we'll start working on problems. But I don't like to work with people who haven't got a vision for the future because short term fixes are just that. They are band aids, they're short term. And I'm in it for the long haul. If you're going to improve, if you're going to be coached, you need to have a long term vision in mind because otherwise it's just messy. Life is messy already. And as a business owner, you're going to be that much messier if you're not thinking of things in the long term.
Very famous, uber famous business coach did Good to Great. Name
Oh,
slips
Jim
my mind.
Collins. Yeah.
Right. Jim Collins talks about the vision, the destination that's so far on the horizon, it's likely to exceed your own lifetime. Another place that I see that, and it's that came actually out of World War II, and that was what they call the commander's intent, which aligns very well with the idea of vision. If nobody knows what's going on, or there's some reason the people on the front line have insight and lack of communication with the decision maker, they know where the company vision is going. And as Jim Collins would say, right, get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off the bus, and know where you're going.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good.
I'm an inventor, so I have some very specific criteria. If something doesn't work, like a mindset, like a direction in coaching, if it doesn't work, let's talk about how to change it. And I love that you started with growth mindset. Before I became aware of it, I saw it in the classroom, and ironically, it was one of my high school students who I would assign them to get a TED Talk so that they could listen to English in any subject they're interested in and have professional translations to support their understanding, their meaning of it, but they would get lots of extra exposure to native speakers at native speed, the way real life, right? And practice like you play, exactly what Erickson always talked about. And one of them sent me, it was either Angela Duckworth, who then led me to Carol Dweck.
Mm,
Yes, that's the path it took. So it's great because, I learn, I don't care if you're 2 years old. If you have something to teach me, I see it. But it's interesting how even culturally, oftentimes it's almost rejected because it's like, well, this is hard. I could fail. It's like, yeah, well, if you're failing, that's actually a neurological underpinning of working at that top edge of your skill. My muscles are sore. Can I lift weights and get stronger without being sore? It's like, yeah, no, you can't. It's
right.
required. I'd like you to put in some of your own input as to what kind of interview you would like to have. Spontaneous, fixed, random questions, both or some format I've never even thought of yet.
Both is great for me. I can monologue if you set me up with a good one, but I have no problem with a little bit of ping pong.
Nice. I love it. In fact, one of my interviewees taught me something I really loved for a phrase. I talk to think. And some people would argue from the science that, oh, you can't think and talk at the same time. It's like, really? When I'm talking, oftentimes because I'm talking, I have insights while I'm answering one question or while I'm talking about one thing that I would not have had I not actually verbalized what I was thinking.
Yeah, my wife's the same way. She's a verbal processor. We will have much better extemporaneous discussion than we would ever if we sat down and course corrected a curriculum for the next 10 weeks.
Cognitive ping pong. I love it. The first one I really want to ask everybody, and that is, what questions do you think we should be asking ourselves about transforming organizational culture and leadership?
Oh, I love it. And I appreciate that you worked in leadership into that discussion because I think so many people have tried to define leadership that it can actually be unhelpful to use the term, and the trappings that go with it are equally unhelpful at times, especially when people hijack the term leadership and try to force what I think are maybe even toxic versions of the term leadership. We certainly see in our culture at large negative stereotypes for what leadership looks like, authoritarians and pseudo godlike leadership styles. And these are negative formats that don't evoke the right image for people in a business culture and a work culture. But I think if we're going to try to, in a Socratic method, get people to think about culture, we need to start asking motivations. We need to start with, what do people want from a culture? And what kind of values do we have that need to be present? And which of them are okay with changing from institution to institution? In my coaching practice, I help people come up with their core values. And I think that is crucial. It's critical to culture. But there are some values that need to stop being on the wall because I think they're table stakes. If you don't have them, you don't even have a business. So for instance, my least favorite core value to see on on business's list is integrity. Not because I think you shouldn't have integrity, but because I think if you don't have integrity, what are we even doing working with you as a company, right? As an employee, if I think that you didn't have integrity, I wouldn't spend my time there. I wouldn't spend my money with you. These are things that should be so part of who we are that we don't have to say them. You know, there are varying levels of what that might look like. There are some people who are like, okay, but we're going to try to benefit the company over the customer, or we're going to benefit our stakeholders even over our employees, whatever it looks like. And so what that does is that puts them in ethical gray areas. And so I understand what people are saying is that they want to be above board. But there are so many other more descriptive ways of saying that than using the word integrity. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he actually encourages people to not use single words for core values, but to use descriptive phrases. So if you say, we're customer first, or we're ethical in our decision making, that's a much better description of what we mean by integrity than just using the nice bland word integrity, putting it up on the wall somewhere. So I think if we're going to ask ourselves good questions about culture creation, it starts with a fundamental agreement as a group of people. What are we doing here? Why are we the ones doing it? And is there any other group of people elsewhere that can do it in a different way? But we're trying to define it in this way. And all of a sudden, you have a solutions first, customer first, integrated accountability group that are accomplishing something for the benefit of someone else. In my run with business coaching, one of the things that we do is product audits. And product audits are fun for me and not so fun for some other businesses, because what I'll go through and I'll just start with the basic question: does this actually solve someone's problem? Or are you just selling something to be selling something? And that is a great way of starting your culture conversation, because I guarantee you, if your product isn't solving anyone's problems, it's going to be hard to sell it. If it's going to be hard to sell, you have already put your management against your salesman, and you've already put your salesman against production, and so on and so forth. So sometimes people get frustrated with me because they'll say, Jonathan, that's a really basic principle, or that's a really fundamental thing to say. Why can't we get into some more advanced theory? And I'll be like, guess what? Business, even though it has complexity to it, is based on fundamentals that if you don't get them right, it will be infinitely harder to get things right down the road.
Right. I love that. I love that. And what came up in my brain was a book I haven't seen in a long, long time. This was literally decades ago that I read it. It was called Winning at New Products. I'm proud to say it was written by a fellow Canadian. And at the time, it was something really, really almost a revolutionary idea, right? It's like, well, hold on. So you're saying we should take products and make them market derived. And one of the examples they gave was, well, we have this fantastic printer, but the supply, the paper supply for it is on a continuous smooth roll. It's not fan folded, it has no separations, and it's ridiculously expensive, but it's way better than any other printer in terms of image quality. It was like, yeah, but nobody, when they looked at it hindsight, they failed miserably because nobody wanted it. It was like, you mean I have to like measure and cut my own paper? On the flip side, I think what's really interesting about that is I remember when I was listening to Beyond Entrepreneurship 2.0, and Jim Collins talked about something that I suspected but had no proof of yet. Winning at new products is solid. Is there a market demand for it? But what was intriguing to me is he said from his research that, in fact, not only market pull, but technology push is a real thing. Post-it notes didn't have a market. It's like we have this rather useless glue, but works really good for these sticky notes. And that's how I think it was DuPont's chemist, took this thing that nobody wanted and it was a bad glue for most things and turned it into a tremendous. It was like, I have a solution that's looking for a problem. So it can go both directions. But yeah, without those fundamentals, like you said, you're hamstringing everything. And is it, I want to make money? I'm greedy, I'm selfish, and I don't care about anybody else, which could be uncomfortably outed doing some kind of product audit, where it's like, does this actually serve any function, regardless of whether it's market pull or technology push? Does this solve a problem? And I want to mention only one other example because it's one of the most universal solutions to so many things. When the laser was invented, it very quickly and very famously among physicists, inventors, technologists became the solution with other problems. Like, oh, cool, look, a pretty light that's coherent. How many things today have lasers in them? So if we get as narrow as saying, can this make a solution that people would want if they knew it was available? It still then becomes market. It still solves a problem, even if it didn't come from the market as a request. It's good to have both, but if it doesn't solve a problem, then it's just you trying to make money and selfishly, really.
Right. And there are plenty of solutions that we might say that are um in the advanced stages of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? There are plenty of solutions that we don't really require for our mental and physical safety or for our psychological health, like, but there are plenty that give us pleasure and they're solving problems too, just in a first world sense. But those still are answering problems. And even more so as someone who believes in the trickle down effect of capitalism, if you are wildly good at selling a product that's just for fun, you're paying your employees well and providing them psychological safety by a great work culture. That means that those families are going to be psychologically safe and healthy because mom and dad are healthy. And the home environment gets better, which means that the kids get better. It's just this massive trickle down effect. And but it all starts with something solving something, right? Some solution to some problem, and that if you reverse engineer it, makes for a great culture. I guarantee you, some of the coolest companies that you go to work for have some of the coolest solutions to unique problems. My brother actually works in the manufacturing industry, and he specifically oversees the product fulfillment for like gears for these enormous machines. Now, my brother doesn't exactly have this cool, flashy like brand that someone would just, automatically know who he's talking about. But I guarantee you start thinking about the products that those machines produce, and you would know what it is. And so there's another thing to make a bookmark there for. If you can draw for your company a connection from what you're doing to the ultimate value that it provides to culture and society, even if it's 4 or 5 steps down the road from what you're doing, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more enjoyable to work there. And people don't like working just to sustain their living, but they do enjoy coming to work for their coworkers and for the benefit that they're providing to society, even if it takes a bit to explain it. And this is where, at the top of the food chain, leaders have to be the chief cheerleaders of the organization and the benefits to the society at large, or benefits to the culture of the employees, or whatever it is, because they're the ones who are seeing the value at the high level. They're the ones who aren't on the line, close up to the product, 5 inches away. They're the ones sitting up, working with other distributors, working with other manufacturers, working with customers and consumers. They're the ones who can draw those connections, and they're the ones who are responsible to do so because they're the only ones who can actually make that connection.
Well, when you said that, it popped up. It was like drive, Daniel Pink, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. Start with why. Actually, in most cases, that's a terrible question, and ironically, a great question simultaneously. Why we do something really does matter. Starting with why, especially if it's in a coaching context. I like what Michael Bungay Stanier said about that in his book, The Coaching Habit, and that was, don't start with why. What made you da da da? Because as he says, and I couldn't agree more, especially as a teacher and a coach myself, is if you get the tone even slightly wrong, even if you get it perfect, but their mindset is not in the right place right now, it's an accusatory question by definition. Teach, learn, practice, or solve.
Teach. I'll take teach every time. My favorite thing, it's actually, this is why I got into coaching. I spent 10 years in higher education on the staff side, not on the faculty side. My wife is a high school English teacher here in the States. And for 9 years, we did this like parallel track career where I was on the higher ed side in the enrollment offices, looking at people's test scores. And my wife is in the high school hallways, and she's, educating them so that they can take their standardized tests. And we just had this conversation back and forth and back and forth. And it was about capacity and the ability to take these tests well, and so much conversation around it. But what I found is, as I got into my career, I could pay a lot of money for employees to come into my office and take over other departments, operations, and do things. So as the director of student recruitment and the director of communications, I could suggest technically by my authority that I need to take over the responsibility for the School of Business, or the School of Humanities, or the School of Nursing, their marketing, their sales tactics. I could forcibly put myself in place to do the things that I didn't appreciate how they were doing it, or I could teach them how to do it and watch it work massively better than I could have ever tried to do of my own accord. What I would find is, if I could teach them the principles of marketing and enrollment, they were way more intuitive on how to do it for their academic unit than any of my professional teams at a corporate, like, conclusive team in the office. What I found is that there's much more joy as well in helping people do things that they want to do, but they don't know how to do it. If there's a hunger for that kind of information and for that ability, I would so much rather teach. Now, I'm intrigued by the solve because by nature, I think I'm a problem solver. I like to sit around and dream about things. That's like, I daydream. I'm an ideator. So the solving is intriguing to me as well. But I chose a career in this stage of my life for coaching and educating because there's almost nothing better in the world than watching the light come on in someone else's eyes when they get the principle and they give you the appropriate use case in an illustration. They get so excited when you affirm them, right? That's a dopamine hit for me. Like I love that.
That's awesome. Do you have anything to add to that?
And in the doing, obviously, like I think they're connected. All of these words are connected, right? Because if I hadn't learned and if I hadn't practiced and solved some things for my own skill sets, I wouldn't be able to educate someone else. And so it's not like you can really ever separate those things from each other into vacuums. But if I'm going to choose one to do for pay, for my benefit, for my joy, it's going to be educate every time.
Right. And I like what you said when you pinged on solve. That's the reason I can do things like leadership and culture building, coaching and training and that kind of stuff. Really, to me, it is no different than the product development. This is a problem that has a solution, and there's research and science-backed methods versus superstition and nonsense and fake gurus. If what I know today is proven entirely false or less than the best that we now know of, tomorrow I drop it like a hot rock. I'm no way ego attached to. I think that this is the great thing. I think it's a great thing normally because I learned about it and the science behind it combined with my experience. But if at the same time somebody can show me a better way, I'm totally disloyal to dogma. I love solve. I love all four. And just like you noted, there really can't be separated. And that's one of the reasons I chose these phrases. Solve resonates with me the most right now because whether I'm helping somebody build their culture or fix their culture, fix their vulture culture, as I like to call it, it's to me just another invention, right? Whether it's a product, a physical thing, as in manufacturing, or a cognitive cultural problem, it's just a problem and there's a solution, and I'm an inventor. One that I just recently finished called 10 to 25, which was recommended by on LinkedIn by Angela Duckworth and Charles Duhigg. And when you mention Maslow's hierarchy and especially getting out of Maslow's basement, he refers to that in one of his books. Let's make some fantastic food at the mess hall in the military. We've got all the food, same as every other place, but this was an example of getting out of Maslow's basement and, getting something more hedonistic out of it, but making it so that people take pride in their work. It's like, I'm just serving slop to the rank and file. Well, if it's I'm serving dining to the rank and file, suddenly you've got that extra meaning that's been created by getting out of Maslow's basement. When you were talking about a hedonistic product or a product that's more about pleasure, where when there's a really cool solution, people love it and has a great culture, immediately I was thinking of Reed Hastings, No Rules Rules. There's nothing more hedonistic to and unnecessary for our lives from a evolutionary survival standpoint than watching the latest Umbrella Academy episode or whatever it happens to be. They proved the best business case I've ever seen for don't treat people like idiots. You hired them to be experts, let them be experts, and hold them to high standards. Commander's intent, most of the stuff we've talked about, was integrated, and he talked about really well in his book. It's like, give people something they love to do, make it meaningful for them, whether it's only hedonistic or not, and set them free. You hired them. And unless you're the command and control, what you talked about, the anti-leader, the boss rather than the leader, you are losing the collective intelligence of a brilliant crowd you hired to be brilliant and then told them to shut up, get in line, and do what they were told.
There's some real power to hiring the right way. In higher ed, this is unique, right? As a situation, in a private school, well, we have a specific mission that we're trying to accomplish, and that's not the same mission as a public university or the private university down the road. But that mission, that guides how you hire. And once you hire, you as the leader have made the choice. I want them on my team. And you're absolutely right. You can do yourself a favor as the leader by allowing that team member to play the part that they're supposed to play, because you're not going to get what you want out of an employee if they don't want to do it. I have had some incredibly intelligent employees and coworkers who, when put in the wrong role, as we talk about Collins, the wrong seat on the bus, right? You put them in the wrong spot and they do not look intelligent. They do not perform well because they're not even doing something that their skill set allows them to, their mindset gives them enjoyment for, whatever it is. I'll tell you, for a specific example of myself in my own career, you could not pay me enough to do financial management for a career. Like, I know how to do it. I am decent at the process. I'm nowhere near like accounting level, but I can do financial management. But I'll tell you, I would take my eyeballs out if I had to do it every single day. Like, I enjoy the connection that finance has to business. I enjoy the benefits in my personal life that finance brings, but I would never be able to do an entire career on it. And I wouldn't even show up like the same person if that was my responsibility every single day. And the power of a good leader recognizes that even if you as the leader didn't recognize them appropriately for where they were going to be hired in the first place. So let's say we hire someone to do an HR role and they're really excited about it. You think they're a slam dunk for the role. But 9 months in, you realize this person is not fit for this job. However, they're really great for this other role. And even though I don't have a vacancy in this other role, I will make a vacancy over here because I want to keep this person. And I think if we give them the option, they'll transition over. You give them that option, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to take that option. And that other percentage, they're going to probably walk away. And you have given them the option of doing that in a safe way because you recognized that their worth is not less, but their alignment is not where it needs to be for the role that you've given them. And I think that we're at a spot in business where we need to be more comfortable with cordial leavings instead of emotionally entangled leavings, because it's not personal and it's not even just business. It's just human. We're not meant for something. We're not built for something. And to be true to my growth mindset, my affinity for Carol Dweck as well, it's not like someone can't improve in something. That's not what we're saying. If we really wanted that person to be in that role that they didn't look great in today, and that person really wanted to remain in that role, you can give them the ability or the time needed to improve and to see if they could shift their working ways to that role. But improvement is not the same thing as alignment in fiber. So I think that there is a little bit of the nature and nurture into this discussion as well. And we can go round and round on that one all day long. Any individual, we could argue about their nature and nurture and never end up with a conclusive evidence either way, because we can't truly measure one another against each other. There's no commonalities that allow us to do that kind of social research in its pure format. And so when I tell someone, I'm going to allow you to improve in this area as a manager, what you're saying is, I believe that you can improve. I can give you this shot. And if you want to, you're going to be a lot better at it in 6 weeks than you were today or 6 months. But what we're also saying is, but if you don't want to do that, we're not going to think any less of you and give you the option of leaving or moving to a different seat on the bus.
I love that, because now that my mind got hooked into Netflix, Patty McCord was there at the same time that Reed Hastings, when he chronicled in his book. I can't remember McCord's book, the title of the book, but she was the HR director at the same time. And she talked about this all the time. And she talked about some third person witnessing her hugging somebody. You know, it's like, oh, take care, nice, friendly hug. You were talking about the cordial departures. And when she was asked immediately after this, and she describes it in her book, she says, "Oh no, that was somebody I fired." I was like, "What do you mean? Somebody you fired is hugging you?" I was like, "Yes, because at Netflix, not only did we have this high standard, and if you couldn't meet it, you knew that you could possibly get fired, not for your first mistake, probably not for your second, but for repeated multi-million dollar mistakes. It's not realistic. Clearly, that's not the best place for you." But literally, it was like, okay, this isn't the right place for you. We wish you well. Oftentimes what they would do when they fired somebody is they would give them a very reasonable, no BS, no run around trying to get out of giving a severance package. Here's your severance package. Here's a hug. If we can connect you with people who help you thrive, we will. And what you said about nature nurture, my background or my formal education is neuroscience. So that informs all my perspective in terms of the leadership and coaching and everything else. And not only can we not disentangle it, but it's a pointless thing to do. The environment is fundamental. How you are raised can affect the way your brain was able to wire and how you now manage things. Conversely, I have not found the correct chronotype, but all my life and in every opportunity I've had, that was not an environment thing. For if it was, why was I a night person in Canada and now 17 hours away in Japan? Why am I still an aggressively night person? So both are true, and it's foolish for us to even debate it. It's like we are at our best, nature and nurture, and both things are true. The growth mindset, obviously, we can get better, but also if we're naturally not good at something, and we hate doing it or don't get joy from doing it, sure, by all means, if it's valuable to you for your own self-improvement, for your own self-development, to practice something that you know you basically suck at to get better for its own sake, fine. But I also agree with Gary Vee on this one important point, and that is triple down on your strengths because it's the nature part of who I am.
There's something really good here that I've learned from, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the author Michael Hyatt. He was a publisher for the majority of his career and then made a switch into coaching kind of before coaching really was a mainstream concept in business. And he started a company that was around his skills and abilities and strengths. And then as he was more and more into what he was doing, he wrote some books. Those books garnered him a following. He ended up producing a planner for folks to be able to increase the productivity, which is one of the main things he was speaking on. And then he developed what he calls the Freedom Compass. And I pulled it up real fast because I think it's really cool to insert into this part of the conversation as well, because he separates our desires from our desire zone from our drudgery zone, because there are things that we are highly passionate about and that we're also highly proficient at, and he calls that your desire zone. So that's true north. But all the way on south of the compass is your drudgery zone, and that's your low proficiency and your low passion. There's overlap there, but then to the east and to the west is our distraction zones and our disinterest zone, where we might be highly proficient in something, but we have absolutely no passion for it. That's me in accounting, financial management. That's the disinterest zone, because I'm okay at it, but I don't have any passion for it. But to the west is our distraction zone. And this is right now, this is being artificial intelligence, right? It's something that's really intriguing to me that I need to improve on for it to be in my desire, passion, and proficiency zone. I love this graphic, this tool to be able to help people with, because they'll say something that is very close-minded and they'll say, well, I'm just not good at, and they'll fill in the blank. And I say, let's actually do some inquiry on this and figure out why. Is it because you don't want to, or because you don't feel like someone told you, or whatever it is? And then when they find, inevitably, what people find is that it's actually in their disinterest zone. Very few people have a job that's in their drudgery zone. unless they're just doing it for subsistence, most people are not in a drudgery zone role. They're in their disinterest zone. And then it's just a matter of let's figure out what is your desire, and then we'll work towards that. And there's so much meaning to feeling the freedom of, oh, I don't have to love this, even though I'm good at it as well. I don't have to love it.
As far as I'm concerned, if you're a teacher and you haven't figured out growth mindset, at least on that intuitive level, that my students, if I teach them that trying and struggling and getting better is a natural and inevitable part of learning, they will do it. And unfortunately, here in Japan, it's almost the opposite. It's like if they struggle, go into panic mode and give them something entertaining and easy to do so they can validate their egos. It's like, in other words, you're training them to suck and be dependent on reinforcement for effort. It was like, oh, well, nobody's reinforcing me, so I guess I shouldn't do anything, or I don't want to do anything because I am literally addicted to regular reinforcement versus random variable reinforcement. What came up was when you were talking about, sometimes you could call it fixed mindset or not, but some things we're just not good at everything. Even with growth mindset, even if we're trying now at 57, if I've tried really hard and it's still an issue, then maybe there are some things I'm just not good at. Let's call what we're talking about also could be called the zone of incompetence. Some things we're just not good at, and that's not a problem. And nobody wants to live in the zone of incompetence, right? You maybe are required to do it, but you hate it. And even during that time, it's like, this was my job, or if I was required to do more of this, I'd have to leave my job because I'm miserable and I feel bad. And it's not that I'm lazy, I'm trying. It's just some things I'm not good at. And that's okay because somebody's a genius. So converse to the zone of genius. Let's call this the zone of incompetence, that which we are not good at and naturally struggle to improve at, zone of incompetence.
And I love that because I think there's a high value in showing, not just vocalizing, but showing people in the classroom, in the coaching table, just in society at large, that if we all were good at the same things, we would have a very bland society. But the fact that we have a diverse set of skills is what brings us beautiful new inventions, brings us beautiful art, brings us culture and a society that's interesting and has the ability to move and to change and evolve. That is only going to happen if some of us are not good at some things. And this is and it's Michael Hyatt, and it's in his book called Free to Focus. And the book was a enormous help to me in a time of my career where I wasn't sure if it was my personal problem or if it was the way that I was being led or if it was the job description and why I felt that I wasn't being successful. And there was some freedom. There was major freedom to me in identifying that my job responsibility was in my disinterest zone. I was very good at it, but I had no passion for it. And so I think it's a huge benefit for people. Like full disclosure, I'm actually a Michael Hyatt certified coach, certified guide. So I live and breathe his material. But it's not just for a professional purpose that I platform him. It is because it's literally changed my life. And I think even if folks don't like his style and methodology of productivity, this one asset, the Freedom Compass, it should be applicable to just about everyone.
Thank you. And the two main sources I get books from, 10 to 25, was from LinkedIn, and two authors that I respect and have followed their material for years. Within books that I really like, if an author mentions a great book that they really liked in their book, I absolutely mark that down. And people I know, real human beings.
On my website, I have a download, my 10 favorite books from 10 years of business, 10 years of leadership. And it's one of my favorite things to hand out to people in conversation. It's a free thing. It's not, because I firmly believe that if you're in any kind of leadership role, which very simply defined is any kind of supervisory or influence style, position. It could be peer influence. It could be organizational, supervisory role, or whatever. If you are a leader, you must be reading. If you are in a role with other humans, you must be reading, because it is only by reading that you're going to expand your capacity. And we cannot be sedentary mentally if we intend to solve the problems effectively that we don't even know exist yet. So often I'm reading a book because it's interesting and because, like you, someone suggested it, whether it's from another resource or through a professional contact or whatever. And those books that are interesting first end up being a solution later to something that I didn't know I was going to need. Case in point, when I was working in higher education, I wasn't really studying business per se, the fundamentals of how to run a business, because I was a middle manager in the communication department. And so I was focused on leadership. So I had this recommendation for a business book, How to Run a Small Business. And I was like, okay, I'll read it because I love the author and I like you, the person who recommended it to me. So I will read the book. And it wasn't until 2 years later that I decided to become a business coach. But I would not have had that option mentally had I not read the book 2 years prior. It just wouldn't have even been on my radar. It would have been a complete unknown. Reading is a core characteristic. I think reading is not something that you do necessarily for the sake of accomplishment. I think it's something that you do as a discipline for what it does for you. If you're not allowing the book to read you at some level, you're probably not actually engaging with the ideas as well. One of the other like pet peeves of mine that I have that I'm not that great at myself yet. I'm trying to be better at this in my public sense, but I can't stand when someone gives me a full endorsement of a book without any caveats as well, because I don't think I've ever read a book that I fully agreed with line by line. Maybe a practical angle, or there's a syntactical error, or there's an argument that I don't appreciate. Something about a book is not going to resonate with me, and unless you have a critical eye, you're probably not applying it correctly. You're just allowing the words to pass through your lenses, right? Or through your ears, whichever format it is. And I'm an ears guy as well. I have 2 kids. I'm busy, right? So I got to have it through the ears. Anyway, the biggest thing about this is if you're not going to critically think through what you're reading, you might as well not read in the first place. Just read novels. Be entertained, right? And there's nothing wrong with novels, but their novels aren't necessarily all meant for your improvement. So yeah, that's a big pet peeve of mine.
There's no such thing as learning style. So any way we learn based on decades of research, it turns out we are equally proficient at learning through any modality. We may have a preferred learning style, but it does not actually affect our ability to learn. It may affect our enjoyment in that sense. It's like, well, I like listening rather than seeing. I like seeing because in terms of learning preferences, I'm absolutely visual. But yeah, the whole thing is the amount of material and knowledge I can get via listening is so much greater with virtually no effort. The average book is 7 or 8 hours. That means if I listen 1 hour a day, which happens easily. Before COVID, I was focused on the product development and I switched to coaching and consulting as sort of the incipient business going, oh, well, this is just inventing. And these now hundreds of books I've listened to for my own purposes. This really started with the success journey and how many very famous gurus are, excuse my French, full of shit, and in many cases don't have any idea what they're really talking about. They're great at selling books and marketing themselves, but have no real solid knowledge or understanding. But they don't really care as long as they can sell their product. A lot of the books I recommend may not have caveats. Lots do. I say, I like this, I didn't like this. But I have a recommended books list on my website. But the qualification is, unless this is like 90+% that I agree with it or whatever, if it's unless the threshold is so good that I would recommend this book to my best friend who I really care about their success or their interest. It doesn't make the list. I read a book by, I think she was a neuroscientist, which normally I agree with, but it's like, oh, your feelings are all constructed from your body sensations and reality doesn't exist. It was like, tell the bus coming towards you that that's true, and we'll see how well that stands up. Yes, our perception of reality is a downgraded version of reality, but there's so much consensus. We're both watching the bus. You're standing in front of it, or I'm standing in front of it. We may not perceive the color red exactly the same, but we can both agree that if I don't move and the bus doesn't slow down, my brain and my perception of reality is going to get scattered all over the road. So let's cut the crap that it's not, oh, it's all a hallucination and none of it is real. I love philosophy, but let's get real about it. We have so much overlap in what we perceive, which is, like I said, a lesser version of total reality that our brain can grasp, that clearly some of it is real enough we can say we have shared reality, and it is not just my opinion, my feelings, and my body sensations.
Mm, mm. You're speaking my language.
And for that book, it was like, here's the book. I mostly think she's just ridiculous in a sense. Lots of good points, but I totally agree with this. So if it's on my list, it's got a very high threshold for agreement, support, or telling me why I'm wrong. And I go, they made me think.
Yeah.
So, and what I love to do now, press the wheel, and what happens is it randomly comes up with a question, some from famous interviewers, some of my own questions, but it's random to add fun. Are you good?
Absolutely.
What's something great about your current or previous job and why?
Well, honestly, I'm super blessed, so I could choose from a lot of things. Well, working from home is something that I didn't realize that I would enjoy. So I'll take a both and on this one. So in my previous work, I had some incredible employees that became very close friends, and we still communicate today, that have just impacted my life so positively through friendship. And the power of culture cannot be overstated when you have a great team and you're in sync and you enjoy each other's company. That is a blessing to be able to exist in that kind of culture. But at home, I really enjoy watching my 5-month-old and my almost 5-year-old interact now. They're in
Mm-hmm.
such vastly different places in their adolescent journey, but and everyone said this ahead of time that it would be fun to watch them together, but there's just nothing quite like watching the 5-month-old eyes light up when her brother comes in the room. She knows his voice, and he is just enamored with this tiny human that they're just enjoying life together. And these are perks from working hard, working at home. The schedule, the flexibility is what a lot of people will say is the benefit from working from home. And I agree with that. But there's extra pressure for your own productivity's sake, for keeping your tasks in line. As a small business owner myself, coaching other small business owners, I get the pinch of, if I work more, things get better. But if I work less, I get to see my family more. And so it's just like, which one are you trying to think about? And I think there's a myth. This is a rabbit trail, but I think work-life balance is a myth. I think it's about your values and which of them are a priority in any individual season. And so I love the fact that as a 31-year-old, I can take a step back in my career and kind of put it in low gear as opposed to putting it in high gear, to be able to watch my family grow up. Is it a joy that I don't take lightly? And then I know that plenty of other people don't have that opportunity to. And so the responsibility I feel to enjoy it is high every day. I feel that responsibility, but it is a pleasure. It is a pleasure to be at home with my people. I say that I have the best coworkers in the world now.
Right. I love that. One of the things that I had hoped but didn't see come out of the pandemic, I mean, I would not wish all the harm and trouble the pandemic caused, but it really did give us a blessing in the context of business leadership and learning and training and culture in particular. And yet, most businesses learned, I use my French again, fuck all from it. I was astounded to find, and I was very excited about the idea that when businesses realized, when they were forced to realize that so many jobs could be remote or hybrid, and the value that brings to people. Now, this goes back to Drive and Daniel Pink when you talked about the ROWE, the results only work environments. Is like, look, you want to work from home? You want to come, Tim, you're a vampire. You want to come in at midnight and leave at 9 in the morning so you can go work out before going to bed? Great. That they don't care so many jobs, and not all, obviously. There's no need for people to be in the office. That is purely dogma. And once again, Adam Grant recently verified what any sensible person who values their private life knows, and that is I'm happier, more loyal, and more engaged at my work if I feel like it isn't a competition between what I need to do or what I choose to do for my income, and what really matters, because at the end of the day, whatever your personal life is, that's what really matters.
It's important to think through as a leader that if you don't trust your people in the situation that they're working, that's probably because there's one of a few things are true. You aren't managing well, so you're not even sure what they're supposed to be doing in the first place, and so you can't keep up with them. And you're relying on ancient management techniques that which is keeping them afraid that you might pop your head in, catch them doing right or wrong. That's option number one. You have outdated management principles. Number two, you didn't hire appropriately, right? We talked about this already. If you didn't hire the person for your work culture and the role in the first place, you will be afraid of them not accomplishing what they need to accomplish because you know that they weren't set up for success. You could also have the problem that you aren't defining collaboration correctly. Collaboration does not require proximity. It is enhanced in many ways by proximity, and there are some versions of communication that really can't happen unless you're in proximity, but there are so many components to individual effort and production and productivity for most institutions that hybrid is probably my favorite way of working in the first place. It gives you the option of deep work days, whether that's in the office or it's at a coffee shop or if it's somewhere else. To be honest, even before I started working from home, every quarter I went to my local public library for an assessment day. I wasn't in the office, but I'll tell you, I accomplished more in those 7 hours at that library than I did the 2 weeks on either end because I was by myself in a quiet zone. And my body knew that when I sat down in that specific chair in the same spot in the library every quarter, I was going to be wildly successful in that day. And I couldn't agree with you more. The pandemic scarred all of us in emotional and physical ways, but there's been a lot of advancements that we can point to because of the problems. And I think it's actually a great metaphor for us as a work culture, as humans, that we have to go through hard things to learn important lessons. And for me and my wife, we learned the value of home because my son was 6 months. He was 6 months old when the COVID shutdown started. And so we learned that we loved working from home together while he was a baby so that we chose the careers that we have now so that we could be home with our daughter. And I would not have chosen that. I can almost guarantee you, I wouldn't have chosen this life had I not had that exposure during the COVID shutdowns.
It really goes back to that, right? That you didn't know the value it had. And like you were saying, if you're not learning, if you're not growing, Number one, I would question whether you should be a leader. Like, I don't really want to be a leader. I've done a bunch of learning and I learn every day. I want to help make other leaders great. I don't care if anybody ever knows my name except leaders and those who can use the kind of services that I can do to make their lives better, their companies better, and the world better. Because I don't want to be a leader. I want to be able to farm out all the crap that I hate to do and stay in my zone of genius. But we can never reach that point where, oh my God, I get to watch my 5-month-old bond with my 5-year-old in a way that there's no amount of money that could compensate for it, right? You didn't know that until you were forced into the situation. At the time, COVID was sort of in its apex. The woman I was dating at the time, I was really impressed with her company and her boss. It was like, well, almost immediately upon COVID becoming an issue here in Japan, her boss had a computer at her house saying, okay, you can work remotely. Like, drop of a hat. He's relatively young for a leader of a large company. So he was 40 something or early 50s. And it was like he was young enough to be comfortable with the technology, but it was like almost immediately upon COVID becoming an issue, everybody had a remote work option at home. So even if they had COVID, they could just keep going. And she actually learned the opposite of what I learned during COVID. By and large, she really liked the hybrid model with a weight towards the office because she liked to be able to socialize. Whereas me, it's like, I want to be able to be a digital nomad and live anywhere in the world and do my work. And I'll come in person when that's the best thing, as you said. There's a lot of situations where maybe in person is better and more desirable, nonverbal communication, certain training and everything else. But by and large, when it's not necessary, imposing it is very industrial revolution thinking. Elon having the factory people go to the factory to work it makes sense. Having engineers who use computers be forced into the office because the factory has to do it is retarded, to use a completely now politically incorrect word. It doesn't make sense if somebody's job can be done equally, and in fact, like I said, lots of research supports much better from home. That option should be on the table because that immediately improves culture. It improves their well-being. It improves the likelihood you will retain that talent, which is massively expensive to replace, versus retaining because you just took some dogma out of your head that was pre-COVID or, like I said, industrial revolution era. If it works and it's demonstrated to work, why on earth would you now impose something? Look at how many people actually from big companies just said, okay, screw it. I'm a highly qualified, in-demand person. You don't want me to work remote? I'm not going to work for you at all. I'm just going to go find another job because I have no problem replacing you as an employer. So much has been lost from a lack of learning from leaders who were just too rigid about that thing. And it shocked me, honestly. In Elon's case, it's probably his self-diagnosed, but very likely true, Asperger's syndrome. He has, like, I have ADHD, so I can argue that I have a deficiency. But unlike Steve Jobs, who is highly socially intelligent, so when Steve Jobs was a terrible leader, and I think he was one of the worst leaders in history, not for his ability to do certain things in business and innovation, but the way he treated his people. He was not Elon Musk. I have problems relating to the appropriate way to behave around people. I think Elon doesn't have much of a choice in that. I think Steve Jobs, on the other hand, having seen him when somebody called him out, this is an old video of somebody saying, Steve, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm also a programmer and I know more about what you're talking about right now than you do. And he stopped. He paused for a good long time. He took a drink and he says, you're right. What I learned from that video is Steve Jobs, as charming and a marketer and everything else, he didn't lack the social intelligence or the ability to restrain his abusive nature that he expressed when he wasn't accountable to somebody against that, like, which was most of the time. He has been documented in more than one book by people who work directly with him to go to people and say like this, you're a waste of space. So he's responsible because he did have the self-regulation and social intelligence. Elon, it's not quite as clear, but all of that comes to the same thing. If people can work from home better, or if people can do any version of work better as a result of what we learn from COVID, that's just better for your business. Even if you're selfish and greedy and you don't care about people, if the business results improve, why would you mess with them just because you think something that has no actual effect on results? It's crazy.
It is. It's actually it's quite adolescent. I'll take my toys and go
It
home.
is. That's precisely what it is. And it's shocking. I mean, I just wrote my newsletter about the ostrich effect. And, it's exactly what it sounds like. I just learned about it, so I wanted to share it because I'd never heard of it. When people essentially engage in ignoring or refusing to believe evidence because they don't like what it has to say, rather than going, hold on, I hate that, but I have to think about it because there's evidence to support it, right? And it wraps up into confirmation bias and other things. A lot of biases overlap. It's hard to tell where one starts and another one ends, but you see it, and there's a perfect example. It's like, I don't care about the evidence. I just think people should be in the office so they're coming back. That's not a way to run a business. That's, as you said, it's juvenile. Okay, this is a new one I'm extremely excited about. And that is, I'm creating a game for teaching leaders how to transform their organizational culture. What question, activity, or game mechanic is a must have?
Okay, so a cultural outcome that a game. So let's work backwards, and then we can find a way to get the interaction that we want. The outcome that we want out of a game for culture could be your perceptions of people are misinformed. You are predisposing to not like someone or to think that they are able to do this, that, or the other thing based on externals or email communication or whatever else it is. So we need to find some kind of activity that allows us to be completely shocked by who believes thinks something different than what you would want. This is a classic thing that we see in entertainment. My wife and I enjoy some of the cultural commentary from the animated movie Tangled, when you've got these pirates that have a dream that are completely disconnected from the mercenary approach to wealth that we ascribe to piracy and to thievery. You got these massive, masculine, hulking, dirty people who want to play pianos and dance and bake, and they like unicorns. This stuff happens in life every day. Like, most people would be shocked to see their coworkers' softer side, or maybe they're a soft person with a hard side. These are really important lessons for us culturally because we're judgmental by nature, because we need to judge. We need to make judgment calls for effectiveness, for security, for safety, and that's appropriate. But we also need to get past that. And if we take people's first impressions and we project that on the next X amount of years of engagement, it's going to be super negative on that experience.
I absolutely love that. And what it reminds me of, I hook everything back to sort of evolutionary biology in the brain. It's absolutely true. We did need to make judgment. I call it the evolutionary default. That is, there are so many things that we do today. No, hold on. Just wait a second. Because the way our brain evolved, it started at the bottom, down here, the cerebellum and stuff, and evolved upward. That is the top layers. I'll take that off now. But no, I love it. I love it. Because the top layers where we think, and particularly here in the frontal lobe, all of this came after. The spine, the part that lets us breathe and breed and fight and flee, were a priority for us. As a result of that, let's create a scenario. Your doorbell rings. People always talk about, oh, don't judge. Well, it's not a question of whether we should or shouldn't judge. It's a fact that we do judge, but then it's what happens after that that matters far more. Your doorbell rings right now. You go upstairs. It's maybe late-ish at night. Your wife and your kids are sleeping. And there's a guy at the door. He has a machete in one hand, a severed head in the other hand. But remember, it's important for you not to make an inappropriate judgment. Inappropriate judgment is an utterly ridiculous concept when we're talking about our core survival. And this goes to even like discrimination and racism and like tribalism, which is also part of our evolutionary history. At one point, it was necessary, and those who decided they'd be best not to judge the severed head man with the machete at your front door died, did not make babies, and therefore that non-judgmentalism didn't exist or isn't highly present in our current population. So what you're talking about, or the idea is, of course we judge something. That's inevitable. We have cognitive biases. We judge things rightly or wrongly, but something like you're talking about for this game would be brilliant because it's like, Tim is really straight talking, kind of likes to swear quite a bit. He seems very self-certain, so he must be a jerk and not have any, basically you get the caricature, the Rocky and Bullwinkle perception of the world. And if that's all you see at work, like you said, but oh, so Tim really likes art and he loves to play drums. And sometimes when he watches a movie, maybe he cries, but he can't be sensitive because he's a jerk when he sees things that he thinks are not okay. Like you said, that it's inevitable that we judge, but if we could surface that judgment is there, but that people are so much more than we see, and in terms of creating empathy, creating a culture where you go, wow, I never knew that, and the closeness that develops between people, utterly brilliant. I love that. That's a direction for a mechanic, a direction for an activity I had never thought of, which is why I'm so excited. That question's going to work gangbusters. What would you like to do next?
Let's take like maybe 2 or 3 questions more.
First time, this format actually worked pretty good. Okay. What are the most significant challenges you face in transforming organizational culture and leadership?
One of the things that I have experienced myself in organizational change is that the folks that matter the most in making the change possible most likely are the ones that are going to be the hardest to get to agree that the change needs to happen. This means quite a few things. We don't have time to go through all of them. There's like this is like books worth of content, right? But in my previous employment, which I learned from lessons that I could never have dreamed that I even needed to learn until I did, and have set me up for a great career now, there were quite a few things that needed to change culturally. And one of the biggest problems that I see in organizations is that the insider is the only one that has a voice, and that the outsider is inherently wrong or misinformed because they're outside. And that can further digress to, if you leave, you no longer get a voice ever because you left. And I watched this happen year after year in an education system. There's natural cycles. Teachers, faculty, administration, staffers, they would come and go. And in an organization that's been around for a while, there's a trajectory of change. Sometimes that trajectory is quite flat. And then there are these moments of monumental change because of overhaul in leadership structure or in personnel. And so there's like this tendency to, in a quite negative way, to assume that personnel changes equals culture changes. Because we hired this person, we're changing. Because we promoted this person, we're changing. And this is so far from the truth. You can promote a great person and then absolutely cripple them to make the change that everyone hopes they'll be able to make. It's very discouraging. And so the challenge that this presents to people, if you're a middle manager or lower in the organizational chart, this causes frustration because you're the one who sees the need for the change the most. Your division is behind, or your team is dysfunctional, or the product you are responsible for can't be fixed, or it can't be produced effectively. Whatever it is, you're the one seeing the issue and you float the problem up the chain and it dies. And this is where we can learn from our friends at Toyota, who gave this wonderful principle that anyone should be able to voice the problem at any time. Stop the assembly line. This is such a great learning from a formerly industrial revolution system that said everything has to be perfect, everything needs to be identical, everything has to be done quickly, it should be as fast as possible so we can make the most money. But they said, hold on, the problem is that we're producing 100 identical products that have the same problem. And now we have to go
100
back and
pieces of
fix them.
crap.
Exactly. They're these oversized paperweights. And so what we have to do as a culture is we have to give people the freedom to pull the plug, or we have to give people the freedom to provide the solution. And this is something that is difficult for someone who is ensconced in their leadership position to hear, because it's a direct reflection on them. And it's not personal. 9 times out of 10, it's not personal. It's just the ability to improve. The amount of times that I've heard this exact phrase, I just want to be able to do my job. People want to do their job. People want to be effective. People want to be good. People want to do what they're supposed to do on the whole. There's some people who would rather not do anything. But for on the whole, people want to do their job. And if you give them the freedom to do their job, they're going to help you with a solution. And so it's a roundabout way of saying it's a big, consistent, sticky thing that organizational change, organizational cultures are only as good as the ability for the entire team to speak into the process.
The autonomy to help is like, I have an idea. You don't have to agree with me, but without the psychological safety and the opportunity to voice it, you don't even know this might be an industry revolutionizing, a planet revolutionizing idea. But if it's like, sit down, shut up, you're a carbon-based profit unit, which unfortunately is still I think the default, it'll never happen. And this is where I became such a fan of Ray Dalio from Principles, right? It was like, if the janitor happens to be a hobby expert about gems, and at Bridgewater Associate, he overhears Ray talking about an investment and something that he's not well informed about, that is, Ray says something that's completely wrong, and the janitor is legally obligated, or any employee is legally obligated, if they have credible knowledge, to inform Ray or anybody else above them in the organization, excuse me, you're wrong. That's impossible because of XYZ properties of gems. If that investment is based on what you just said, it's a lie. And if you don't out your knowledge, your credible knowledge based on real stuff, not your opinion, you can be fired for not expressing and sharing. If you don't pull your own version of that umbilical cord, you can be fired because you knew something that could have saved or helped the company at a critical time, and nobody else in the room knew it, it doesn't matter your rank. Who do you know who could benefit from being interviewed by me on these topics? Leadership development, culture change, those kind of things.
Ooh, I could probably put a couple of people down. Probably someone from from my former organization. He's in the research and development or the institutional research and effectiveness department. His name is, if you can catch him in his schedule, he's a night owl as well, so it might actually work out in your benefit. He would be a fascinating conversation for you. I think he would do it and he'd be helpful. He's working on a PhD in organizational management or organizational change, and he has been an enormous advocate of systemic change and a long-term approach. He's not an ideas guy, he's a data guy. And so he and I got along well when I was at that organization. I could probably come up with a couple of names and forward them to you even after we're done.
Who do you know who is looking for guests who can speak on these topics? That is me as a guest.
And I could do the same thing where I could do an introduction. There's two that I was just on. Maybe they would invite you on. One is on leadership. He's not a coach, but he's kind of a leadership discussion kind of podcast. And it was kind of a formulaic podcast, but honestly, it was a lot of fun. So,
What questions or frustrations do you have about transforming organizational culture and leadership if you haven't already just answered that in your previous response?
probably the more global problem that I see with organizational change is that it can be too tied to legacy, or it can be not tied to legacy enough. These are reverse bell curve situations, in my opinion. So you have people who are so predisposed to make sure that their legacy is in a particular way that they hyperfixate on things being exactly how they want, or people are so not caring about their legacy that they really don't care what people think about them. And so they really don't care what you have to say. And so I think legacy is a high concern of mine. It's something that I think and I try to coach to, is that people in your direct set, your direct environment, they're going to remember you for something. And so you might as well try for it to be something specific. And obviously, people have their own minds and they have their own wills. And so they're going to think what they want to think, but that doesn't absolve you from the responsibility to try for it to be a positive effect.
To aspire to something that matters to you and you think would be good.
Yeah.
How could I make this interview better?
Oh, you know what? This is a good style of interview for me. So I think if you find the right kind of people, this is a really good format. I don't need a lot of preparation for most interviews because I know what I think. If you don't know much about the person, you could seed the conversation with questions like, what are you reading? Would you want to talk about those things? That kind of thing would make a conversation flow faster if they don't already have some confidence in that way of thinking.
Is there anything we've left unsaid that we should talk about before we finish?
Maybe even just in a closing remarks kind of format, I would say that organizational culture is a powerful tool, not just for the direct impact of those at that organization, but for the community around it. I live in the Midwest, lots of small town in our area. You can drive 15 minutes in any direction and you're going to find another small town of 15 to 30,000 people. And these are small communities, and most employers in those communities have an enormous effect on that community's well-being. And that being said, it is a high responsibility for that community that these cultures be positive, that they be welcoming, that they be encouraging, in a sense that they need to be progress minded, not progress for progress sake, but progress for the community's sake. And being engaged as a culture in your community is going to have a trickle down domino effect that you don't even understand the benefit of when you're doing it. Yes, this might sound like you're doing it for humanitarian or posterity's sake, like, but that is the responsibility of good business. And if we want our young people to be engaged in productive futures, they need to see that it is easy to get into good business, that it is easy to get into a culture that is welcoming their thinking and their questioning, and that it's not just a safe place, but it's an enjoyable place to go and add value. That's the power of a positive culture at work. The converse of that is that the power of a negative culture is going to infinitely undermine the progress of that community. And it doesn't take much to go to small communities and see what that looks like as well. I tell people that leaders, especially CEOs, if there's not a huge leadership team, if it's just a big CEO personality, those corporations, those companies take on the personality of the top dog. And communities do the same thing with companies. The biggest employer in a community will, in a lot of ways, determine the culture of that community. And so it's not just for the benefit of the bottom dollar, but it is for the benefit of the community that cultures need to be positive.
Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. I loved it. We definitely are aligned on so many things. Let's connect on LinkedIn. Thank you very much. Have a good night, and we'll stay in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim.
Okay, bye bye.
All right, bye.